Hello and welcome to the sixth and sadly the last in our series of Lent with the Psalms. The sixth Sunday of Lent is, of course, Palm Sunday, or to give it its full title, Palm Sunday of the Passion of the Lord. Today, uniquely, we have two gospel readings, the story of Christ's entry into Jerusalem and the story of his death. The psalm is chosen to go with the latter rather than the former. It matches with the first reading, which is from Isaiah 50, one of the songs of the suffering servant. And in particular, the phrase that comes from it that is so striking is, "I set my face like flint. I know that I shall not be harmed." It speaks of Christ's, I suppose, stoical, for want of a better word, approach to his own passion. Christ's passion, especially in Matthew and John, in both of those gospel readings, both of those passion stories, Christ is strikingly in control. He rises above it. He is not quite contemptuous, but certainly he sets his face like flint in the face of the hatefulness of those who oppose him and the contemptible nature of those who would do him to death, the chief priests and the Pharisees, but also Pontius Pilate, especially in St. John's version of the story. All of these people are beneath him, and he declines to answer their foolish and footling questions. And yet, the psalm that we read is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The psalm from the beginning of which Christ himself quotes as he dies on the cross, this great cry of dereliction. Why does Christ pray this psalm? Does he feel deserted by God? No. And yet, let's not move too quickly away from that idea. The letter to the Hebrews speaks of Christ as making a journey outwards and downwards from his heavenly throne, from his rightful place as Son at the right hand of the Father, with whom he participates in the work of creation. There's a very similar theme in the letter to the Philippians chapter 2 about how Christ emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and then humbled himself further yet, even to accepting death on a cross. This is the outward and downward journey of the Son into the human condition. And although, of course, Christ was never deserted by God, and indeed Christ never moved away from God, to whom he is always united, there is a certain sense in which his entry into our human condition brings with it a certain outward movement, brings with it a certain theological distancing from his own divine nature. He separates himself from his glory, and he expresses not his own dereliction, but rather the dereliction that is inherent in the human condition under sin. He speaks for us all when he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And yet, of course, God never forsakes Christ, and God never forsakes us either. God has never for one moment forsaken any human being. Why does any human being experience this dereliction? Because our eyes are closed to the reality of his presence. Very often, this is our own fault. Very often, the reason that we cannot sense the nearness of God, his intimate presence to us, more present than we are to ourselves is because we've chosen to close our eyes to it, because we've chosen to turn away from God. God is always right there, like the sun shining on a bright summer's day. If we find that we are living in shadow, it's because we're cowering under a parasol of our own creation. All we have to do is turn back to him. All we have to do is open our eyes. All we have to do is throw away that parasol. But there are other people whose sense of their abandonment by God is not brought about by their own fault, but by the experiences that God has permitted them to have, by the wrongs done to them by others. God knows, even by the wrongs that have been done to them, in some cases by the church itself. And so their eyes are blinded, not by their own fault, but by our fault, yours and mine. And we should hear their voices when we hear this cry of dereliction. And we should ask ourselves, what do I need to do to help people to open their eyes, to experience the love of God shining on their faces like the sun on a summer's day? So we shouldn't too quickly jump to kind of the easy answer to why Jesus says what he says on the cross. But at the same time, there is some truth in what is, I think, the easy or the easier answer, which is the tradition that when you quote the beginning of a psalm, you are quoting the whole of that psalm implicitly. And this psalm doesn't just express dereliction like so many of the psalms in the Psalter. It begins with a cry to God for help, and it ends in a cry of exaltation. I would say probably more than half of all the psalms are patterned in some way on this movement from despair into hope, into confidence, into rejoicing. And that's the same movement that this psalm makes. I will tell of your name to my brethren. I will proclaim you where they are assembled, the psalmist says in the same psalm. And Christ, of course, knows as he dies on the cross that he is going to rise again. This in no way reduces his suffering, in no way reduces his anguish. The two are simply not comparable. But Christ goes to his death with absolute confidence in God's love. His death is a death of perfect obedience. And the psalmist also expresses this over and over again. His desire to be obedient to God's law. One of the great themes that runs through the whole of the Psalter is how much the psalmist loves the law of God. The law of the Lord is perfect. It revives the soul. The will of God is what gives us hope. To keep the law of God is to conform ourselves to his will and thereby to set ourselves free. And Jesus knows this. This doesn't mean that he looks forward with pleasure to the suffering that he is to undergo, but it means that he looks forward to the overcoming of that suffering in the resurrection with absolute confidence. It's that absolute confidence that has enabled him to say in the Garden of Gethsemane, not only let this cup pass me by, but also not my will, but thine be done. And we can make the same prayer, not my will, but thine be done. I very often advise people when they ask me how to pray, you should pray for what you want. Jesus on the cross wants to be set free from his suffering and pain because though he is not only human, he is entirely human. But what he wants fundamentally is for God's will to be done. And so his prayer is a prayer that we should make our own as we come to the close of this Lent. We have done all sorts of things because we've wanted to teach ourselves to be obedient to God. We've undertaken extra prayers. We've made acts of penance. We have performed works of charity. And we've done all of these things knowing that in no way can they earn us a place in God's favor. In no way can we work our way into heaven. We've done them in response to God's love because we want him to teach us perfect obedience, because it's perfect obedience to God that is true human freedom. And so, as I say, when I tell people how I think they should pray, I say, pray for what you want. Be honest about what you want. And then say, not my will, but thine be done. And this is, of course, the prayer that we pray every day. Thy will be done, and thy kingdom come. And when we pray, thy kingdom come, we hear Christ say to us from the cross, today you will be with me in paradise.